I went to return a screwdriver. My neighbor said, "You picked the right night to show up." "You picked the right night to show up, Domitila," Ugo said, his voice a low scrape against the sudden, oppressive silence of the hallway. The screwdriver she'd meant to return felt suddenly heavy, cold and entirely inadequate as a reason for being there. Past his shoulder, the apartment wasn't the neat bachelor haven she expected. It was a chaotic mess of overturned furniture and scattered papers, and in the center of it all, a woman was weeping into her hands. "Don't just stand there," Ugo whispered, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I need your help hiding her before Jason finds out." Domitila Toninelli hated the fluorescent hum of the fourth-floor hallway. It always sounded like a dying bee trapped in a glass jar, a constant, irritating reminder that her life in the sprawling apartment complex was anything but peaceful. Tonight, the hum seemed louder, more insistent, pressing against her temples as she clutched the yellow-handled screwdriver. It belonged to Ugo Asenio, the enigmatic man in 4B. She'd borrowed it 3 days ago to fix a loose cabinet hinge, a mundane interaction that had somehow stretched into an awkward tension. Ugo was polite, always offering a half-smile that never quite reached his eyes that were the colour of bruised plums. He was a man of routines, leaving at 7:00 a.m. sharp in impeccably tailored suits, returning at precisely 6:30 p.m., the faint scent of expensive cologne and ozone clinging to him. Domitila, an illustrator whose life was measured in ink spills and missed deadlines, found his precision both fascinating and slightly intimidating. She stood before his door, her knuckles white around the tool. "Just give it back, say thank you and leave," she told herself. It was 9:00 p.m. A bit late for neighbourly visits, perhaps, but she needed the excuse to stop staring at the blank canvas in her living room. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could connect with the painted wood, the door swung open, as if he'd been standing there waiting. Ugo looked terrible. His usually perfect tie was loosened, hanging limply against a rumpled shirt. There was a smear of something dark, ink, dirt, on his cheek, and his eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with a frantic energy. "You picked the right night to show up, Domitila," he said, the words tumbling out in a harsh whisper. Domitila blinked, the rehearsed speech about the cabinet hinge dying on her lips. I just came to return this," she stammered, offering the screwdriver like a pathetic peace offering. He didn't look at the tool. He looked past her, down the empty hallway, before grabbing her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, almost desperate, and pulling her inside. The door clicked shut with a finality that sent a cold spike of adrenaline through her veins. "Ugo, what are you doing?" she gasped, pulling her arm away. Then she saw the apartment. The pristine modernism she'd glimpsed on previous occasions had been obliterated. The sleek leather sofa was upended, revealing a tear in the bottom lining. Books were vomited from the shelves, forming chaotic mounds of literature on the hardwood floor. A shattered vase lay near the window, the water seeping into the rug like a dark stain. And then there was the weeping. It was a soft, choked sound coming from the corner near the overturned sofa. Domitila followed the sound and saw a woman huddled there, knees drawn to her chest, face buried in her hands. Her blonde hair, matted and dishevelled, hid her features, but the trembling of her thin shoulders spoke volumes of her distress. "Don't just stand there," Ugo whispered, moving closer to the woman. "I need your help hiding her before Jason finds out." "Jason?" Domitila echoed, her voice trembling. "Who is Jason? Who is she?" "Ugo, I just wanted to return a screwdriver." Ugo turned back to her, his face pale. "Jason Cousin," he said, the name dropping like a stone. "Her fiancé, and if he finds her here, he'll kill us both." The room seemed to shrink. Domitila had heard of Jason Cousin. He was the owner of the complex, a man whose wealth was only matched by his notoriously volatile temper. He was a phantom landlord, demanding rent through aggressive emails and terrifying eviction notices, rarely seen but always felt. "Her name is Elsa," Ugo said, his voice softening slightly as he looked at the trembling woman. "Else Madsen, and she needs to disappear tonight." The name Elsa Madsen triggered a faint memory. Domitila had seen her once, standing beside Jason Cousin in the lobby, looking like a fragile porcelain doll trapped in a tempest. She'd worn a look of profound sadness then, a sadness that now manifested as terror. "Why is she here?" Domitila demanded, finding her voice. "Why didn't she go to the police?" Else lifted her head. Her face was bruised, a blossoming purplish yellow mark beneath her left eye. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto Domitila. "The police work for him," she rasped, her voice hoarse from crying. Everyone works for him. Ugo was the only one who promised to help. Domitilla looked at Ugo, re-evaluating the quiet man with the plum-coloured eyes. Help her how? I have a contact, Ugo said, running a hand through his messy hair. Antonello Hagen. He runs a logistics company that moves difficult cargo. He's organising a safe passage for her out of the city, but the extraction point isn't until midnight and Jason knows she's gone. He'll start searching the building soon. So, why pull me into this? Domitilla asked, panic starting to ebb, replaced by a cold, practical anger. I'm just the neighbour who borrows tools. Because Jason knows I know her, Ugo admitted, his gaze dropping momentarily. We have history. He expects her to run to me. He doesn't know you. You're invisible to him. The eccentric artist in 4A. The description stung, but she couldn't deny its accuracy. To the rest of the building, she was the messy woman who ordered too much takeout and played indie music too loudly. I need you to take her to your apartment, Ugo continued, just for a few hours until Antonello signals that the transport is ready. If Jason comes here, he'll find me alone, acting like I have no idea where she is. He'll search my apartment too, Domitilla argued. He won't have a reason to, Ugo countered, unless you give him one. Please, Domitilla, look at her. Else was watching her with an expression of such raw pleading that it felt like a physical blow. Domitilla looked from the bruised woman to the desperate man, the yellow-handled screwdriver still clutched in her hand. This was insane. It was dangerous. It was the kind of drama she only painted, never lived. Fine, Domitilla snapped, making a decision that she knew would alter the trajectory of her life. But she needs to be quiet. And you, she pointed the screwdriver at Ugo, you owe me an explanation, a real one. Later, Ugo pressed, the relief washing over his face so palpably it made him look younger. Help me get her up. Together they hoisted Else to her feet. She was shockingly light, her frame frail beneath the oversized coat she wore. Domitilla supported her on one side, Ugo on the other, as they moved toward the door. Ugo cracked it open, peering into the hallway. The fluorescent light still hummed, oblivious to the tension. Clear, he whispered. They moved quickly, awkwardly across the short distance between 4B and 4A. Domitilla fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking before finally pushing her door open. She ushered Elsa inside, Ugo following closely behind. Her apartment was a stark contrast to Ugo's current chaos and its former sterile perfection. It was cluttered with canvases, smell of turpentine and old coffee, and felt lived in. Safe. Sit her on the futon, Domitilla instructed. Once Elsa was settled, Ugo turned to leave. I have to clean up my place, make it look normal. If Antonello calls, I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice. Wait, Domitilla said, catching his sleeve. What kind of history do you have with her? Ugo hesitated, his dark eyes locking onto hers. She was my wife, Domitilla, before Jason took everything. He slipped out the door before she could formulate a response, leaving her alone with the bruised woman and a secret that felt heavier than the silence in the room. The silence in Domitilla's apartment was broken only by the erratic ticking of the wall clock and Elsa's ragged breathing. Domitilla moved to the tiny kitchenette, the revelation hanging in the air like smoke. His wife. She filled a glass with water and brought it to Elsa, who accepted it with trembling hands. Drink, Domitilla commanded gently. It will help. Else took a small sip, her eyes darting nervously around the cluttered space. It's very colourful, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ticking clock. It's messy, Domitilla corrected, sitting on a sturdy wooden stool opposite the futon. But it's safe, for now. She leaned forward, the need for answers gnawing at her. Ugo said you were married. How did you end up with Jason? Else closed her eyes, a fresh wave of tears leaking from the corners. It's a long story, a stupid, naive story. We have until midnight, Domitilla pointed out, gesturing to the clock which read 9:45 p.m. Else sighed, a sound that seemed to originate from the depths of her soul. Ugo and I met in college. We were young, idealistic. He wanted to be an architect. I wanted to write. We married right after graduation. It was happy for a while. She took another sip of water, her gaze fixed on a half-finished painting of a stormy sea. But Ugo's ambition outpaced his success. He started taking risks, borrowing money from the wrong people to fund a project he believed would make our fortune. Let me guess, Domitilla said, a sinking feeling in her stomach. Jason, cousin. Else nodded, her knuckles white around the glass. Jason was a silent partner at first, but when the project failed, he wasn't silent anymore. He demanded his money back, with interest we could never afford. He ruined Ugo, bankrupted him, destroyed his reputation. And then... She faltered, her voice breaking. And then he offered a deal. Domitilla finished, the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. He said he would forgive the debt, Elsa whispered, staring down at her hands. If Ugo walked away, if he left me... Domitilla frowned. And Ugo agreed to that? He sold you? No! Elsa's head snapped up, a flash of defensive fire in her eyes. Ugo fought. He tried everything. But Jason has ways of destroying people that don't involve money. He threatened Ugo's family, his sister, Leia. She was sick. She needed treatments Ugo was paying for. Jason threatened to cut off the funds. So you left him, Domitilla concluded, her heart aching for the bruised woman in front of her. I made the choice, Elsa said, her voice dropping back to a whisper. I went to Jason. I told Ugo I didn't love him anymore, that I wanted the security Jason could offer. It was the only way to protect Ugo and Leia. The sacrifice, the twisted nobility of it, made Domitilla feel slightly nauseous. And now Jason is tired of me, Elsa said bitterly. He's found someone new, Martine Pedersen, a young actress. He wants me gone, but he won't let me leave on my own terms. He needs to break me completely. Tonight, he was going to make sure I never caused problems for him again. That's why I ran to Ugo. He was the only one I could trust. Before Domitilla could process the horrifying implication of Elsa's words, the heavy silence of the apartment was shattered. It wasn't a knock at the door, but a sound from the hallway. The unmistakable, authoritative stomp of heavy boots, followed by a loud, demanding crash against the door of 4B. Jason Cousin had arrived. The crash against the door of apartment 4B reverberated through the floorboards, vibrating up through the soles of Domitilla's paint-splattered Converse sneakers. It wasn't a knock. It was a demand, an act of physical violence against the wood. In the center of her cluttered living room, Elsa Madsen flinched so violently she nearly tumbled off the futon, a high, thin whine escaping her throat like a kicked dog. Domitilla lunged forward, pressing a hand over Elsa's mouth, her own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pressed her finger to her lips, eyes wide, silently commanding the terrified woman to breathe quietly. Through the thin drywall separating the two apartments, the muffled, aggressive baritone of Jason Cousin bled into Domitilla's sanctuary. Open the damn door, Ugo. I know you're in there. The voice was pure venom, coated in the unearned arrogance of a man who owned not just the building, but seemingly the people within it. Domitilla strained her ears, holding her breath. There was a pause, the agonizing screech of hinges, and then Ugo's voice. Calm, impossibly level, betraying none of the frantic desperation she had witnessed just 10 minutes prior. Jason, it's late. What is this about? Ugo's tone was the auditory equivalent of an unyielding brick wall. Don't play games with me, Asenjo, Jason snarled, the sound accompanied by heavy footsteps entering 4B. Domitilla imagined Jason pushing past Ugo, his expensive boots trampling the chaotic mess Ugo had ostensibly been trying to clean. Where is she? Who? Ugo asked. Else. Don't look at me like that, you pathetic excuse for a man. The doorman saw her come up here. She's not in the penthouse. She ran to you. She always runs back to her pathetic little safety net. Domitilla released her hand from Elsa's mouth. The blonde woman was weeping silently, huge tears carving tracks through the dust and makeup on her bruised face. Domitilla squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, though she felt anything but assured. She crept toward the shared wall, pressing her ear against the cool plaster. I haven't seen Elsa in months, Jason, Ugo lied, his voice remarkably steady. As you can see, I'm in the middle of reorganizing. If she came to this floor, it wasn't to see me. There was the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. Perhaps Ugo's already shattered vase being kicked across the room. You expect me to believe that? Jason roared. Look at this place. You're packing. You're trying to run. I am cleaning, Ugo countered, a subtle edge of ice creeping into his tone. Not that my housekeeping is any of your business. If you've misplaced your fiancée, I suggest you look elsewhere. Perhaps she finally tired of your particular brand of affection. A sickening thud echoed through the wall, followed by a sharp intake of breath from Ugo. Domitilla gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Else whimpered again, burying her face in a throw pillow. He had hit him. "You smug bastard!" Jason hissed, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly intimate register. "I own you, I own this building, and I own her. If I find out you're hiding her, I won't just ruin you this time, Ugo. I'll erase you." Suddenly, a new voice drifted from the hallway. High-pitched, reedy, and incredibly annoying. Jeffrey Sukup, the aggressively nosy tenant from 4C. "Excuse me, is everything quite all right out here? Some of us are trying to sleep and the bylaws clearly state, 'Shut your mouth and get back in your apartment, Sukup, before I double your rent and break your jaw,'" Jason bellowed. The sound of Jeffrey's door slamming shut was immediate and comical, breaking the suffocating tension for a fraction of a millisecond. But the relief was short-lived. Heavy footsteps marched back into the hallway. "Marion!" Jason barked. A woman's voice, clipped and heavily accented, responded. "Yes, Mr. Cousin." Domitilla recognized the name. Marion Kucherova was the building's facilities manager, a title that barely masked her true role as Jason's enforcer. She was a tall, severe woman with eyes like chips of flint. "Stand guard here, don't let him leave," Jason ordered. "I'm checking the other doors." Domitilla's blood turned to ice water. She stepped away from the wall, her mind racing. "He's checking the other doors." She looked at Elsa, then at the chaotic sprawl of her apartment. Canvases, easels, a half-draped mannequin she used for figure studies, piles of sketchbooks. "Under the bed," Domitilla whispered fiercely, pulling Elsa up by her arms. "Now don't make a sound." She dragged Elsa into the tiny alcove that served as her bedroom and shoved her toward the wrought-iron bed frame. Elsa scrambled beneath the drooping duvet, curling into a tight, invisible ball just as 3 sharp, authoritative knocks hammered against Domitilla's front door. Domitilla paused, took a deep breath, and grabbed a rag stained with cerulean blue oil paint, aggressively wiping her hands on it to smear the pigment. She messed up her dark, curly hair, let her shoulders slouch, and channeled every ounce of the eccentric artist persona she possessed. She unbolted the door and pulled it open a few inches, leaving the chain engaged. Jason Cousins stood in the harsh fluorescent light. Up close, he was a handsome man, but it was a cruel, sharp sort of handsome. His jaw was clenched, his designer suit impeccably tailored, and his eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were utterly devoid of warmth. They swept over Domitilla, assessing and dismissing her in a single second. "Open the door," he commanded, not bothering with a greeting. Excuse me?" Domitilla said, blinking owlishly, her voice taking on a slightly confused, dreamy cadence. "Who are you? It's past quiet hours. I'm in the middle of a very delicate wash. The drying time is extremely sensitive." "I am the owner of this building," Jason interrupted, stepping closer so his face was inches from the crack in the door. "And I am looking for someone. Open the door or I'll break it down and evict you in the morning." Domitilla let out a theatrical, exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes. "Landlords," she muttered just loud enough for him to hear. She unlatched the chain and swung the door open, gesturing grandly with her paint-stained rag. "Welcome to the studio. Try not to step on the charcoal. It tracks everywhere." Jason pushed past her, his nose wrinkling in immediate disgust at the overpowering scent of turpentine, old coffee, and dust. He stalked into the center of the room, his eyes darting into the kitchenette, behind the draped mannequin and toward the tiny bathroom. Domitilla stood by the door, her heart threatening to crack her ribs, playing the role of the annoyed artisan. She studied him with an artist's eye, noting the tense lines of his shoulders, the frantic energy beneath his cold exterior. He wasn't just angry, he was desperate. "Have you seen a blonde woman?" Jason demanded, turning to glare at her. "About this tall, crying, wearing an oversized coat?" "The only blonde I've seen today is the yellow ochre on my palette," Domitilla drawled, pointing to a messy smear on her easel. "I've been painting since noon. Unless she's hiding in my canvas, she isn't here." Jason took a step toward the bedroom alcove. Domitilla's breath hitched, but she forced a scoff. "Careful in there. I haven't done laundry in 2 weeks. It's a biohazard." Jason paused at the edge of the alcove, peering into the gloom. The bedskirt remained perfectly still. The silence stretched, tight and fragile, as spun glass. Finally, his lip curled in revulsion, and he turned back. He clearly couldn't fathom that a woman like Elsie or a man like Ugo would associate with someone who lived in such bohemian squalor. "If you see her," Jason snapped, pulling a card from his pocket and tossing it onto a paint-splattered table, "call this number immediately. If I find out you've lied to me—" Yeah, eviction, ruin, I get the script," Domitilla said, crossing her arms and leaning against the doorframe, desperate for him to leave. Jason gave her one last look of sheer contempt before striding out into the hallway. "Marion," he barked at the stern woman standing outside Ugo's door. "Stay here. Nobody comes in or out of 4B. I'm going to check the cameras in the lobby." Domitilla shut the door and locked the deadbolt, sliding down the wood until she hit the floor. She pressed her hands over her eyes, dragging in a shaking breath. The wolf had left the room, but he was still circling the house. The digital clock on the microwave glowed a sinister neon green, 10:15 p.m. They had less than 2 hours until Antonello Hagen's midnight extraction, and a merciless enforcer was currently standing guard directly outside their only exit. Domitilla remained on the floor by the door for a long time, listening to the agonizing silence of the hallway. Finally, she pushed herself up and walked to the bedroom alcove. "He's gone," she whispered into the darkness. Elle slid out from under the bed, covered in a thin layer of dust bunnies, trembling so violently her teeth were chattering. Domitilla wrapped a heavy, paint-stained quilt around her shoulders and guided her back to the futon. We can't leave through the front door," Domitilla stated, her mind pivoting from panic to practical problem-solving. "Marion is out there." Before Elsa could respond, a soft, rhythmic scratching sound came from the window. Domitilla jumped, grabbing the yellow-handled screwdriver from where she had abandoned it on the coffee table. She crept toward the window which looked out over the narrow alleyway between their building and the next. Rain had begun to fall, a steady, miserable drizzle that slicked the brickwork. Through the rain-streaked glass, a shadow moved. Domitilla raised the screwdriver, her heart in her throat, until a face pressed against the pane. It was Ugo. He was standing on the rusted wrought-iron fire escape that ran the length of the building, connecting their 2 apartments. He looked completely soaked, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, a bruise already forming high on his left cheekbone where Jason had struck him. Domitilla hastily unlatched the window and shoved it upward. The damp, freezing wind rushed in, carrying the scent of ozone and wet asphalt. Ugo slipped through the opening with surprising grace for a man in a tailored suit, landing silently on her hardwood floor. "Are you insane?" Domitilla hissed, pulling the window shut and drawing the heavy blackout curtains. "If Jason saw you—" "He's in the basement checking the security feeds," Ugo said, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He looked at Elsa, his dark eyes softening with a profound, painful relief. "Are you all right?" Else nodded, clutching the quilt tighter. "He hit you!" "I've had worse," Ugo dismissed, turning his attention to Domitilla. Up close, the damage to his usually immaculate facade was striking. His tie was gone, his collar torn, and the bruise on his cheek was an ugly, mottled purple. Yet standing there in her messy studio, he looked more real, more alive, than he ever had in the hallway. "Marion is outside my door," Ugo explained, keeping his voice to a bare whisper. "I had to slip out the window. It's the only way we can communicate." "This is madness, Ugo," Domitilla said, running a hand through her hair, leaving a streak of blue paint across her forehead. "How are we supposed to get her out at midnight with Marion standing guard?" "I don't know yet," Ugo admitted, running a hand over his face. He stepped closer to Domitilla, the faint scent of his expensive cologne now mixed with the raw smell of the rain. "I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. You were just being kind, returning a tool, and I've put a target on your back." Domitilla looked up at him. His eyes, the colour of bruised plums, were filled with a genuine, agonizing guilt. The awkward tension that had simmered between them over the cabinet hinge had evaporated, replaced by the intense, intoxicating gravity of shared danger. "Why did you trust me?" she asked softly. "You barely know me. To you, I'm just the messy girl in 4A who can't keep a schedule." Ugo shook his head slowly, reaching out. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before his fingers lightly brushed against her forehead, wiping away the streak of blue paint with his thumb. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight down her spine. "I never thought you were just the messy girl," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "I hear your music. I smell your paints. I see the colours you track into the hallway. My life has been nothing but grey and black for a very long time, Domitilla. I look at you, and I see light. I trusted you because you are everything they are not. The air between them grew impossibly thick. Domitilla forgot about the cold, forgot about the ticking clock. She looked at his lips, at the slight part of his mouth, realizing with a sudden, terrifying clarity that she wanted him to kiss her. That the fascination she had felt for the enigmatic man in 4B had been something much deeper, waiting to ignite. "Ugo!" Elsa's voice broke the spell, tight and thin with panic. They both turned. Elsa was staring at her hands, her knuckles white. "It's not just me," she confessed, the words tumbling out as if they tasted like poison. "Jason isn't just turning the building upside down because his pride is hurt. He's looking for what I took." Ugo froze, the romantic tension shattering like brittle glass. "What did you take, Elsa?" Elsa reached into the pocket of her oversized coat and pulled out a small, sleek black object, a USB drive. "I couldn't just leave," she cried softly. "I couldn't let him keep doing it. Blackmailing people, ruining lives like he ruined yours. I copied his master ledger. It has everything, the bribes, the illegal evictions, the politicians he owns." Domitilla felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't just a domestic dispute anymore. This wasn't an escape. This was a death sentence. "Else," Ugo whispered, staring at the drive with horrified awe. "If he finds that on you, if he even suspects you have it, he'll kill me," Elsa finished, "and he'll kill anyone who helped me. Then we have to make sure he doesn't find it," Domitilla said, a sudden fierce resolve blooming in her chest. The fear was still there, but it was being overridden by a profound sense of injustice. She looked at Ugo, the man who had suffered so much in silence, and at Elsa, who had sacrificed herself to save him. "We need a distraction," Domitilla stated, moving toward her kitchenette. She opened the cabinet under the sink and pulled out a large dented metal bucket she used for cleaning brushes, along with 3 bottles of highly flammable mineral spirits. Ugo watched her, his brow furrowed. "Domitilla, what are you doing?" "Jeffrey Sukup is an annoying busybody," Domitilla said, a wild, dangerous smile spreading across her lips. "And the building's fire code hasn't been updated since the 80s. We need Marion away from your door, and we need Jason out of the lobby." She held up a bottle of mineral spirits. "It's time to make some art." At 11:45 p.m., Ugo's burner phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a single text message from a blocked number. "Basement garage, freight elevator bay, 15 mins. Do not be late." Antonello had arrived. The plan was terrifyingly simple, mostly because it relied entirely on chaos. Ugo had climbed back across the rain-slicked fire escape to his own apartment, leaving the window open a crack to listen. Domitilla stood in her bathroom, the metal bucket in the sink. Inside the bucket were rags soaked in a volatile mixture of mineral spirits and linseed oil, a combination notoriously prone to spontaneous combustion if left improperly. But tonight she was going to help it along. She struck a match. The flame flared, illuminating the terrified resolve in her dark eyes. She dropped it into the bucket. The chemical fire caught instantly, a fierce, hungry whoosh of orange and blue flames leaping up toward the ceiling. Acrid, choking black smoke immediately began to billow outward, thick as a storm cloud. Domitilla grabbed a heavy bath towel, wrapped it around her hand, and hoisted the burning bucket by its handle. She ran out of the bathroom, coughing as the smoke hit the back of her throat. "Go to the door!" she yelled to Elsa, who was hovering near the exit, pale as a ghost. Domitilla flung open her front door. Marion Kuterova stood 10 feet away, outside Ugo's apartment, turning with a scowl at the sudden noise. "Fire!" Domitilla screamed, pitching her voice into a hysterical screech that didn't require much acting. She hurled the burning bucket directly down the hallway, away from the stairwell. It clattered against the wall, spilling flaming rags across the cheap, flammable carpet runner. The smoke alarm in the hallway shrieked to life, a deafening, ear-piercing wail that vibrated in their teeth. Marion cursed violently in a language Domitilla didn't understand. The enforcer hesitated for a fraction of a second, torn between her orders to guard the door and the very real threat of the building burning down. But as the flames licked higher against the floral wallpaper, self-preservation won out. Marion ran toward the fire, pulling a heavy jacket off her shoulders to smother the flames. At that exact moment, Ugo's door flew open. He stepped out, grabbing Elsa by the arm and motioning frantically to Domitilla. "Go, go, go!" Ugo yelled over the blare of the alarm. They sprinted for the stairwell at the opposite end of the hall. Doors were beginning to throw open. Jeffrey Sukup emerged in a silk bathrobe, taking one look at the smoke and screaming at the top of his lungs, further adding to the pandemonium. They hit the heavy fire doors of the stairwell, pushing through and beginning the descent. 4 flights. The alarms echoed in the concrete shaft, a cacophony of panic. "We need to hurry," Ugo panted, practically carrying Elsa down the steps. Jason will know this is a distraction. He'll secure the exits. Domitila's lungs burned, her legs aching as they took the stairs 2 at a time. The stench of smoke was in her hair, on her clothes, mixing with the metallic tang of fear. She kept her eyes fixed on Ugo's back, marvelling at the strength of a man she had dismissed as merely precise and polite. They reached the ground floor. The lobby doors were just ahead, but Ugo didn't stop. He pushed past them, heading for the heavy, unmarked door that led to the subterranean garage. "In here," he commanded, pulling the door open. The basement was a stark contrast to the chaos above. It was dark, silent, and smelling of damp concrete and motor oil. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, sickly yellow shadows across the rows of parked cars. "Freight elevator bay," Ugo whispered, guiding them through the maze of concrete pillars. "It's in the back." They moved stealthily, the sounds of the fire engines beginning to wail in the distance outside. Domitila felt a surge of adrenaline-fueled triumph. They were going to make it. They had outsmarted the wolf. They rounded the final pillar, the rusted metal doors of the freight elevator coming into view. Parked directly in front of it was a nondescript black transit van. The engine was idling with a low, throaty purr. A man stepped out from the driver's side. He was built like a cinder block, wearing a leather jacket and a flat cap pulled low over his eyes. Antonello Hagen. Ugo let out a breathless laugh of relief, stepping forward. "Antonello, thank God." But Antonello didn't smile. He didn't move to open the passenger doors. He simply stood there, his hands resting casually in his pockets, his face an impassive mask of stone. "I'm sorry, Ugo," Antonello grumbled, his voice like gravel grinding together. "Business is business." The side door of the black van slid open with a harsh metal clack. Stepping out from the dark interior of the van, a sleek silver pistol hanging casually from his hand, was Jason Cousin. Beside him stepped a stunningly beautiful woman with fiery red hair and a cold, calculating smile. Martine Peterson, the actress. She looked at Elsa with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "Did you really think," Jason said, his voice echoing menacingly off the concrete walls, "that you could light a fire in my house and just walk out the front door?" Domitila froze, the cold reality crashing down on her. They hadn't escaped the trap. They had walked right into the center of it. The concrete walls of the subterranean garage seemed to shrink, pressing in on Domitila with the weight of a tomb. The throaty purr of the black transit van's engine was the only sound, a stark contrast to the distant, muffled wail of fire sirens above ground. Jason Cousin stood before them, a silver pistol hanging casually from his fingertips, his designer suit immaculately pressed despite the late hour. Beside him, Martine Peterson's lips were curved in a smile that didn't reach her calculating, ice-cold eyes. "Business is business," Antonello Hagen repeated, stepping to Jason's side and crossing his thick arms over his chest. He refused to meet Ugo's eyes. "He made me an offer I couldn't refuse, Ugo. You, of all people, should understand how the ecosystem of this city works. The big fish always eat the small ones. You sold us out," Ugo said, his voice a low, terrifying rasp. He stepped slightly in front of Domitila and Elsie, instinctually shielding them with his own body. The bruise on his cheek stood out starkly against his pale skin. "How much, Antonello? How much did my life cost? How much for Elsie's?" "Enough to retire," Jason answered for him, taking a slow, measured step forward. The soles of his expensive leather shoes clicked, echoing against the concrete. "And enough to ensure he doesn't end up crushed beneath the wheels of my empire, which is exactly where you are headed, Ugo. You really thought you could outmaneuver me? You, a bankrupt architect hiding in a mid-level apartment like a rat in the walls?" Domitila's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tightened her grip on the heavy, paint-stained quilt she had wrapped around Elsa upstairs, her mind racing desperately for a way out. They were trapped. The freight elevator behind them was closed, requiring a key card, and Jason stood between them and the ramp leading up to the street. "Let the women go, Jason," Ugo said, his tone leveling out into an eerie, unnatural calm. "You have me. I'm the one who orchestrated this. Domitila has nothing to do with it. She just lives down the hall. And Elsa, you don't need her anymore. You have Martina." Martine let out a soft, musical laugh that echoed off the pillars. "Oh, Ugo, you were always so dreadfully naive. This isn't about love or jealousy. This is about property. And Elsa stole something that belongs to Jason." "The ledger," Jason confirmed, raising the pistol slightly, pointing the barrel squarely at Ugo's chest. The silver caught the sickly yellow glare of the fluorescent lights. "Hand it over, Elsa. I know you have it. You don't have the stomach to destroy it, and you certainly don't have the brains to hide it anywhere clever." Elsa let out a broken, terrified whimper, shrinking back against Domitila. I don't... "Don't lie to me!" Jason's voice cracked like a whip, the sudden, violent escalation making all three of them flinch. "I will put a bullet in your pathetic ex-husband's knee right now, and then I will start on the artist. Give me the drive." "Wait!" Ugo shouted, throwing his hands up. "Jason, think about this. The police are already here. Jeffrey Sokup pulled the fire alarm. There are engines in the street. You shoot that gun, the sound will echo up the ramp. You'll never get out of here clean." "I own the police in this district," Jason sneered, though his eyes darted toward the concrete ramp leading to the exit, betraying a flicker of unease. "But I don't want to make a mess if I don't have to, so I brought a little extra incentive, just to ensure complete cooperation." He snapped his fingers without looking away from Ugo. "Antonello." Antonello Hagen sighed heavily, turning back to the sliding door of the transit van. He reached into the dark interior and hauled someone out into the harsh light. Domitila gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. It was a woman, thin and frail, bundled in a hospital gown and a heavy wool coat. An IV port was taped to the back of her pale hand, and she leaned heavily against Antonello to keep from collapsing. Her eyes, the exact same bruised plum shade as Ugo's, were wide with terror. "Lair!" Ugo breathed, the single word carrying a weight of absolute, soul-crushing despair. All the fight, all the rigid determination vanished from his posture. His knees visibly buckled. "Hello, big brother," Lair Headland whispered, tears spilling down her sunken cheeks. "I'm so sorry. They came to the clinic. They said they were moving me to a better facility." "You monster," Ugo hissed, turning a look of pure, unadulterated hatred toward Jason. "She's sick. She has nothing to do with this." "She's leverage," Jason corrected coldly. "And she is the reason you are going to tell Else to reach into her pocket, take out my property, and hand it to me. Because if you don't, Ugo, I won't shoot you. I'll shoot her, and you will have to watch her bleed out on this filthy floor knowing it was your pride that killed her." The silence that followed was agonizing. Domitila looked at Ugo, watching the man she was rapidly falling in love with shatter into a million pieces. He had sacrificed everything. His marriage, his career, his freedom, to keep his sister alive. Now Jason was using that very sacrifice to force the ultimate surrender. Ugo closed his eyes, a single tear escaping to track through the dust and grime on his cheek. He slowly turned to Elsa. "Give it to him," Ugo whispered, his voice completely broken. "Else, please." Else was shaking uncontrollably. She looked at Lair, the fragile woman who had been her sister-in-law, the woman whose medical bills had started this entire nightmare. With a sob that seemed to tear her throat apart, Elsa reached into the pocket of her oversized coat. Her trembling fingers produced the small, sleek black USB drive. Jason's eyes lit up with a greedy, triumphant fire. "Bring it to me." Slowly. Else took a hesitant step forward, leaving the protective shadow of Domitila and Ugo. She extended her hand, the small piece of plastic and metal holding the power to topple an empire resting in her palm. As Elsa moved forward, Domitila's artist eyes, trained to observe the minutiae of light, movement, and human tension, caught something incredibly subtle. Martine Pedersen, standing just behind Jason's right shoulder, was no longer smiling. The beautiful actress's gaze wasn't fixed on Elsa, nor was it on Ugo. Her eyes were locked with laser precision on the black USB drive, and her hand, previously resting on her hip, was slowly slipping into the deep pocket of her designer trench coat. Domitila's brain worked furiously, stitching the terrifying reality together. Martine didn't want the ledger returned to Jason. She wanted it for herself. If Martine got that drive, Jason would become obsolete, and she would inherit the leverage to control a criminal empire. "We are all going to die," Domitila realized with chilling clarity. "Even if he gets the drive, he won't leave witnesses. He can't." "That's a good girl," Jason murmured, reaching his left hand out to take the drive from Elsa, keeping the pistol aimed squarely at Ugo's chest. "See? Was that so hard? Now we can all just—" "Jason, look out!" Martine suddenly shrieked, an Oscar-worthy performance of sudden panic. She lunged forward, not to protect Jason, but to violently shove him off balance. The unexpected force from his own ally sent Jason stumbling sideways. As he fell, Martine snatched the USB drive from Elsa's outstretched hand with the speed of a striking viper. "What the hell are you doing?" Jason roared, scrambling to keep his footing, his gun waving wildly. "Severing my ties!" Martine yelled, pulling a small pearl-handled derringer from her coat pocket and aiming it directly at Jason's face. "You're sloppy, Jason. You let your ex-wife steal your entire life's work. I'm not going to let you drag me down when the feds finally knock on your door. With this ledger, I own the politicians. I own the police, and I own you." The betrayal was so sudden, so shockingly complete, that for 3 agonizing seconds, everyone froze. But Domitilla was already moving. When she had lived in the squalor of a shared art studio in Brooklyn, her mentor had drilled fire safety into her head. She knew instinctively where the bright red cylinders were mounted in any building. Her eyes had locked onto the heavy metal fire extinguisher, bolted to the concrete pillar 3 feet to her left the moment Jason had revealed his gun. With a feral cry that tore from her lungs, Domitilla lunged sideways. She ripped the extinguisher from its metal housing, her fingers instantly finding the metal pin. She yanked it free, hefted the heavy cylinder, and slammed her palm down on the trigger lever. A deafening hiss erupted in the basement. A massive, blinding cloud of thick white chemical foam blasted outward, hitting Jason and Martine with the force of a blizzard. Chaos descended instantly. A gunshot rang out, the sound amplified 100 times by the concrete walls, making Domitilla's ears ring with a high, painful whine. She didn't know who had fired, Jason or Martine, but she didn't stop. She swept the nozzle back and forth, drowning the space between them in thick, choking white foam, obscuring everything. "Ugo!" Domitilla screamed over the hiss of the extinguisher. "Get Lere!" Ugo bellowed back, his voice emerging from the white cloud. Through the fog, Domitilla saw a massive shadow moving toward her. Antonello. The enforcer was coughing, blindly reaching out to grab her. Domitilla didn't hesitate. She swung the heavy metal base of the fire extinguisher like a baseball bat. The solid steel connected with Antonello's jaw with a sickening crack. The giant man groaned, his eyes rolling back in his head, and collapsed onto the wet concrete like a felled oak tree. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on Domitilla's wrist. She screamed, preparing to swing the cylinder again, but a familiar voice cut through the panic. "It's me," Ugo yelled, his face suddenly appearing through the foam mere inches from hers. He was panting heavily, his eyes wild. He had his good arms securely around his sister, Lara, who was clutching onto him for dear life. "We have to move! To the ramp! Where is Elsa?" Domitilla cried, searching the swirling white mist. "I'm here!" Elsa emerged from the foam, her face coated in white powder. But she wasn't crying anymore. In her hand, gripped so tightly her knuckles were white, was the USB drive. Martine dropped it when the gun went off. "Let's go!" Ugo commanded. They sprinted past the groaning form of Antonello, navigating blindly through the chemical fog towards the concrete ramp that led to the street. Behind them, they could hear the furious, blinded shouts of Jason and Martine, still fighting over the dropped derringer in the foam. As their boots hit the incline of the ramp, the red and blue flashing lights of emergency vehicles became visible at the top. The street was flooded with firefighters in heavy turnout gear and police officers with drawn weapons, responding to the massive chemical fire Domitilla had set on the 4th floor. "Help!" Domitilla screamed at the top of her lungs, waving her arms frantically as they breached the surface. "He has a gun! In the basement!" A dozen flashlights immediately swiveled toward them, blinding them in a halo of safety. Police officers rushed past them, boots thundering down the concrete ramp into the smoke and foam-filled garage. Paramedics swarmed them, immediately taking Lere and lowering her onto a gurney. Ugo collapsed onto the damp asphalt of the street, the adrenaline suddenly draining from his body like water from a shattered glass. Domitilla fell to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over him, terrified he was injured. "Are you hit?" she gasped, her hands frantically patting down his ruined suit jacket. "Ugo, did the bullet hit you?" He looked up at her, the bruising on his face stark beneath the flashing ambulance lights. He reached out with a trembling, foam-covered hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing over the dried blue oil paint that still stained her skin. "No," he breathed, a genuine, luminous smile breaking through the exhaustion on his face. "I'm perfectly fine." A few feet away, a police captain approached Elsa. With shaking but resolute hands, Elsa Madsen handed over the sleek black USB drive, the master key to Jason Cousins' destruction. 3 weeks later, the persistent, irritating hum of the fluorescent lights in the fourth-floor hallway had been fixed. In fact, the entire building was undergoing a quiet, thorough renovation. The property had been seized by federal authorities following the staggering revelations found on Jason Cousins' master ledger. Jason himself was currently sitting in a maximum security cell, denied bail, awaiting a trial that promised to drag half the city's corrupt politicians down with him. Martine Pedersen, having sung to the feds like a canary to secure a plea deal, was in protective custody. And Elsa Madsen was gone, true to Antonello's original plan, which Ugo had managed to salvage with another, far more trustworthy contact in the aftermath. She had safely left the country, starting a new life under a new name on the coast of Spain. Domitilla stood in front of her easel, the morning sunlight streaming through the window she had once used to smuggle Ugo into her apartment. The canvas before her was chaotic, a tempest of cerulean blues, deep plum purples, and striking streaks of bright yellow ochre. It wasn't a landscape or a portrait. It was a feeling. It was the feeling of a heavy heartbeat, the smell of rain and ozone, and the fierce, terrifying spark of survival. A soft, rhythmic knock on her door broke her concentration. Not an aggressive pounding. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Domitilla smiled, wiping her hands on a rag and tossing it onto the table. She unbolted the door and swung it open. Ugo Asenjo stood in the hallway. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit. Instead, he wore a soft grey sweater and dark jeans, looking infinitely more comfortable and undeniably handsome. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a faint shadow, and the haunted, desperate look that had once permanently darkened his eyes was entirely gone. In his hand, held out like an offering, was a familiar object. "I believe this belongs to you," Ugo said, a warm, teasing smile playing on his lips. Domitilla looked at the yellow-handled screwdriver. She let out a soft laugh, leaning against the door frame. "I don't know. The last time I tried to return that to you, my apartment almost burned down and I ended up fighting a mobster with a fire extinguisher. A risk I am more than willing to take," Ugo replied, his voice dropping an octave as he stepped closer. The faint scent of expensive cologne now mixed with the crisp autumn air washed over her. "Lair sends her love, by the way. The new clinic is wonderful. She's actually gaining weight." "I'm so glad," Domitilla said softly, her heart swelling. "And what about you, Mr. Asenjo? Now that your demon is locked away, what are you going to build?" Ugo reached out, ignoring the screwdriver, and took her paint-stained hand in his. His thumb traced the knuckles, sending a familiar jolt of electricity up her arm. "I'm not sure yet," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her dark eyes. "But I know I want to build it here, in the light." He didn't wait for permission this time. He closed the distance between them, cupping her face with both hands, and kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of turpentine, coffee, and profound, overwhelming relief. It was the messy, beautiful collision of 2 lives that had crashed into each other in the dark and found a way to spark a fire. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless, Ugo rested his forehead against hers. "You know," he whispered, a smile curving his lips against her skin, "I told you once that you picked the right night to show up." Domitilla laughed, pulling him by the collar of his sweater into the chaotic, colourful warmth of her studio, kicking the door shut behind them. "Ugo, I've got a feeling every night from now on is going to be the right one." And so, a simple, neighbourly errand to return a yellow-handled screwdriver became the catalyst for the destruction of a criminal empire. Domitilla Toninelli stepped out of her messy, isolated world and proved that the most extraordinary courage often hides behind the quietest doors. Ugo Asenjo finally broke free from the chains of his past, finding not just redemption, but a love that brought vibrant colour back to his grey world. They survived the wolf at the door, outsmarted the shadows of the basement, and forged an unbreakable bond in the fires of chaos. If Domitilla and Ugo's intense journey of survival, sacrifice, and unexpected love kept you on the edge of your seat, please give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and hit that subscribe button to join our channel for more thrilling, dramatic, and romantic stories every single week.